Appreciate it. I'm Mark Sarangelo. I'm the Corporate Vice President and Head of Sierra Nevada Space Systems. We're very pleased to have you here and have you here to discuss with this great group of people some really, I think, cutting-edge activities. And the cutting-edge activities are what is the future of global partnerships? And I think if you spent any time in the sessions here over the last few days, you will see that in virtually every major plenary and almost all of the discussions, some type of partnership has come through. Some type of discussion around partnerships have come through. So we put this panel together because it represents, I think, a very broad spectrum of not only the types of organizations that might be in partnerships, but also the types of partnerships there may be. We are fortunate at Sierra Nevada to be in a relationship, in a partnership relationship now with many space agencies, many organizations, and in our programs with all sorts of different types of arrangements with companies and universities. And it has been from the very beginning for us something that we have both privately and publicly touted as something that is really essential to our business. And there are many business models that are out there. We feel the one that we have is one that works very well. We've been very successful with it. And that is very simply to look at what you do and make a very honest judgment and assessment of whether or not you're internally capable, not only capable of doing it, but it is something that's in your business plan. And is there someone or some organization or some group of companies out there that may be the experts in those areas? And while it is harder to do that, and sometimes more costly to do that, in our view, it strengthens the team aspect of what's accomplished. We have taken that idea not just from what we do internally with our group, and we are well now over 50% outsourced in the type of work that we do. We have been fortunate enough to be on over 450 space missions and have wide-ranging programs from the next generation space shuttle we call the Dream Chaser, to work that we're doing on space station, to grow food, to being a small satellite provider, and and to being one of the largest subsystems providers in the world. And we realized in doing all this that those types of relationships are really essential to success. And with over 4,000 things on orbit and a long history of being successful in orbit, we feel that that model from a business perspective is a very strong one. But that model doesn't just stop there. It also reaches out to the next level. And that next level is, how do you enter into unique relationships, perhaps ones that have never been seen before, with organizations, and try to create the path forward. There is a lot of discussion about this idea of public-private partnerships, and it's a very difficult concept at times to execute. But I'm very happy to say that with a number of the organizations that are represented here, we have active and very successful relationships in doing that. So what I'd like to do today is not talk any further, but really spend time with the people here to discuss that, to discuss their views on it, and perhaps get some insight into what they think is the next generation and how it moves forward. And to that end, I think what we're trying to talk about here is not just the past of how things have happened, but what are the aspects that makes a partnership work or don't work? What are the aspects that make it successful? How do you make sure that both sides are getting the types of things that are necessary to be successful? And a lot of that is understanding the other side, the other person, the other organization, and trying to make sure that as you design that partnership, it has elements to succeed and not to fail. And of all the things, that is probably the most difficult. How do you structure these things so that there is flexibility? Because invariably there will be problems, invariably there will be issues, and the strength of the partnership does not come from the day you sign, it comes from the day where there's a challenge. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to the speakers and have them spend a few minutes discussing preliminarily their view, and then we'll enter in a little bit of a dialogue. And rather than spending time going through their backgrounds, I think many of them are well known, I'll introduce them as we go down the line. So Robert, if we might start with you. Robert Lightfoot, who is the acting administrator for NASA. Robert and I have known each other for quite a long time, and before he picks up the mic, I'm going to embarrass him for a moment and say, Robert, on behalf of all of us, and certainly my organization, but I think the whole industry, we want to thank you for the extra effort, the second job that you've been doing for the last year. We know that you had a primary job, and that's still there, but you have stepped up to be the acting administrator for NASA. Now it will be probably close to a year of work doing that, and we all really do appreciate that. You hear about the way people work in government, and sometimes it's in vogue not to say good things, but I will have to say that what Robert has done in leading this organization through some very tough times is, in my view, the most exemplary example of how someone can be in the public sector. So Robert, if I could ask you to take a moment and talk through your slide.
All right, thanks Mark, and thanks for the kind words. We've got a great team, so that makes my job pretty easy. Everybody's been pushing forward, so that's good. What I thought I'd do is talk about our thoughts on public-private partnerships and how we think about, maybe in a different way than you've seen before. And we're only given one chart, so it really nail it here on this one chart, because we usually have like 20 when we talk about this. What we've been looking at is really the regions as we push exploration out, and those regions kind of drive our thinking in terms of where we can utilize public-private partnerships in the best way. Start with the first region is really low Earth orbit, and we believe it's really important for us to enable and mature the commercialization of low Earth orbit. As we push out further from a NASA perspective, if I look back and there's nobody there, that's not much of a program for me. So I really think it's important for us to do that, and we've done several things to try to make that happen. And that's this development mode we're in, where we've brought folks on, Sierra Nevada, SpaceX, Orbital ATK, Boeing doing crew. It's not necessarily that we're doing that the people are different, it's the acquisition approach we're taking. And the acquisition approach we're taking is different than what we've done in the past as an agency, which means we, as an agency, have to accept a little more risk, maybe, or it's really risk in our old way of doing business, versus allowing industry to come along with what they've been doing and actually support our mission. So for us, the goal here with public-private partnerships is actually lean forward more in low Earth orbit to start with, let industry prove their capabilities, and hopefully take over that region for us. Today, if you look at the International Space Station, that's the way cargo works. We've turned cargo over to our industry partners, and they're doing a great job sustaining the International Space Station. So it's been really good to see that. Crew is coming next, and we're excited to see that going as well. And that's required us to change our thinking internally a little bit, but it's been a very good exercise for us. So you push out to the next region, which is really kind of around the moon, but you could go even further out if you wanted to, pushing humans further in deep space. We think that's kind of, because we can rely on the commercial industry and the public-private partnerships, we can push further and start working on those other areas. Again, hopefully one day, pulling folks along with us where we can then move on out even further. So this we call it the frontier, this economic and geostrategic activities. These are the activities where it's important for us to, while we're trying to take care of the industrial base in the U.S., it's important for us to maintain our global partnerships with folks like ESA, Roscosmos, and any of the JAXA, all these different countries that we already work with on the International Space Station. We've built a really strong framework for us to work together. But there's emerging industry, but there's also emerging nations, right? And so we need to make sure we take care of understanding those partnerships as well, so that they can bring this, because I think to get to that last band out there that you see, which is the civilization level achievements, that's not NASA, that's not the United States, that's a global thing. When I talk civilization level, I'm talking boots on Mars, confirming life somewhere else, making a discovery of a exoplanet that we haven't seen before. That's for all of us. I don't care where you live, I don't care where you're from, that's for all of us, and that's in our human nature. So to us, that's how we're thinking the public-private partnership can enable our missions, and the more I can give away as we kind of take these ripples out from Earth, the more I can depend on my commercial partners, whether they're developing technology, whether they're developing full-up spacecraft and launch vehicles, that becomes an enabler for me to move further out. So that's kind of our thinking going forward, and I think it'll be important not only from an industrial perspective, but a global, international perspective.
Thank you, Robert. Next, I'd like to turn to Manu, and similarly, before you start, I'd like to take a moment and thank you. When I first started very early on in the aviation world, one of the things, I'm a multi-generational pilot, and one of the things I was told is that when you do something in aviation, it is across generations. And it is necessary for us to think not only of who we are and what we're doing today, but how does this impact the future. And for the last 3 years, Manu has been running the, excuse me, the Space Generation Advisory Council. And she is coming to the end of that 3-year term today or tomorrow. And we wanted to just thank you for helping to lead the youth of this industry through some very interesting, challenging times, and to providing that leadership and guidance to be able to do that. So on behalf of all of us, thank you for your term and for your volunteer work and the work that you've done with the council, and we hope that the next adventure for you is as equally as interesting for you. So,
thank you. So before I start on my slide, let me just commend the IEF and Mark and Sierra Nevada Corporation for inviting me to this extremely, extremely prestigious panel. So, and seeing the value of, highlighting the next generation perspective on this important topic. So the picture I chose is to represent my vision of the future of the space industry in 10 years. So this picture was drawn by a 6-year-old from Indonesia, and she won 2nd place of the Digital Space Foundation Art Competition in 2015. Now, this drawing might be a little bit optimistic for the next 10 years, and let me break the bad news here. It is not drawn to scale, but I wanted to tell you what I see when I see this picture. Firstly, I see 3 simultaneous launches from 3 different parts of the world. All of the spacecrafts have different designs, which makes me think that they were designed by different countries or different companies. Some are manned missions, some are unmanned missions. There are a number of planets in this picture, and while the current space industry is focusing on the Moon and Mars, I think it's important to also set our sights a little bit further, and as Robert mentioned, really taking that civil aspect to it. So, pushing the boundaries of space, as they say. And we also see the evidence of working together towards sustained life on other planets and for longer duration missions. But overarchingly, I see a feeling and, I see and I feel this feeling of collaboration and partnership. And I also see a lot of exciting opportunities for partnerships in the areas that I've just discussed, and really to harness our collective innovation to the fullest extent for the current space industry and for the future as well. I mean, there is no doubt that global partnerships are absolutely crucial for advancing our missions, no matter which country or which company you're from. And it's really up to us to align our core capabilities and technologies to get to where we're going and achieve the goals that we're setting. So I'll keep my presentation short, but what I actually wanted to do is have everybody under the age of 35 raise their hands in the audience. But I think the young generation may be not so keen on early morning starts. But if those of you who are under 35 could raise their hands. Okay. This is actually a significant amount of people in the audience. So the point that I wanted to make is that if you came to the IEC a couple years ago, these numbers would be less. And so the evidence is there. Young professionals and students want to be part of these discussions. They don't want to just be spectators in these discussions. They want to be active participants. And so by engaging them in these discussions from an early stage, and by letting them help establish these global partnerships now, are going to see the long-term effects in the future. So with that, I'll have a close. Thanks, Mark.
As you can see, the future is in good hands, which is why we should probably just stop there. We're all going to raise our hands if we're under 35, at least in our minds. Next up, I'd like to introduce Eric Stelmar. Eric is the president of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation. He has the strong misfortune of having me part of his executive group, and I was one of the founders of this particular organization, which when we founded it now about, I think 12, almost 13 years ago, there was a handful of entrepreneurs who said, we want to do something together to try to see if we can share ideas. And this whole idea of commercial space had not even been heard of at that point in time. In fact, that wasn't even the name of this particular group. And over the last decade or so, and certainly in the last few years under Eric's wonderful guidance, the organization has blossomed now, and there's well over 80 organizations that are part of this, and it is an organization with a lot of strength, and I will say that Eric has the dubious distinction and probably challenge of having to put 80 people like me in a room and getting them all to say yes on occasion. So it's a very difficult job sometimes, Eric, but you have been a terrific leader for the CSF, and under the last 3 years or 4 years of your guidance, 4 years, 3 years? 3 years. It really has blossomed into an organization that has taken a much bigger center stage for what we do in space. So Eric, please.
Thank you so much, Mark. As you look at my picture, I took it a little literally, and I'm going to lay in this talk with a lot of metaphors and vision, because when I first saw this, you know, what is my vision for global partnership in space in the next 10 years? Like as Manu said, I think often you can't talk about the decade in front of you without talking about the generation that is with you right now, and certainly that young generation that you're looking at, and that is what I think everything that drives us and what we do in humanity is for that next generation. So that is my piece of the next generation. And what she's looking at was the Great American Solar Eclipse that took place on August 21st of this year. And I chose this for a few reasons. One, it's hard to motivate America lately, and we're going through a very divisive time in our country. And one of the things that I saw on this eclipse that we had was that for weeks leading up to it, the talk and the hype and the emotional inspiration that was going on. And then the day of the eclipse, over 80 million people traveled somewhere to see this. 80 million people, almost a quarter of our population, went somewhere to look up in the skies and just stare in awe. But I also see it in a way with this young girl, who's my daughter, Catherine. And I'll tell you, I blocked it out, the other picture of the eclipse to highlight the fact that I let her eat potato chips in the car, and so I just didn't want to think I was just this terrible father feeding her junk. But when she looks up in the skies, what is she seeing? What's the first thing we think when we look into the space? We look at the International Space Station. That's one of the great objects that we can see with the naked eye that has been up there for 20 years now, and tremendous global partnerships with 20 countries that are represented, and that we hope that it's going to be there for another decade in that 10 years. And the people that are living and working, and these young people that can look up and say that I can live and work in this space. As Mark mentioned, we have nearly 80 companies and organizations that we represent. So to put up any picture of one of them would cause controversy with maybe any of the others. So, but I think of also the launch vehicles and how we're going to get there, and the partnerships that we have. And Mark, with your success, your continued success with your announcement this week with the UN, what you're doing with Dream Chaser, and engaging so many international partners, I see that as the future, the global public-private partnership that we have that's existing. I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by the networks and the constellations that are continuously being developed and launched, whether for communication reasons and helping getting near real-time communications to areas of the world that have never experienced it, that don't have phone lines, and the only lines of communication they may have is cell phones. As we're seeing that development in Africa. And I see the work that a lot of the remote sensing companies are doing, especially in light of the face of all the disasters that we've been having around the world, that real-time imagery to help first responders, to help save lives, to help better humanity. I see those values in the next 10 years, and those only growing and getting better. So I also see the challenge that we have educating our youth. It's more of a local, our national problem, but I think it's a global problem. How do we inspire young people today getting into the math and sciences field, especially young women? As I said, sat on a panel yesterday with just all men. How do we inspire young women to do more and to reach, look at the stars and want more? And I think we're doing well, but we have to do better. And those areas, I think that's the global pursuit. And I think through these forums that we have, my colleague Travis mentioned someone at the SGAC dinner the other night. There's the first time she left her Kenya. She's working on satellite communications. Her family has never even left the village. She's 21 years old. These are the generation. These are the people that we want to reach out to. So as I look at my daughter, looking up at the sun with protective eyewear, I think what what she's thinking, what the vision of space could be when she's 20 years old, and what the opportunities are going to afford her. So that's what I like to think about, and I'll get into more detail on how we can do it after.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to turn now to Jan Berner. Jan and I have a long history together, and one of the amazing things I think is that there's all sorts of leadership in the world, and certainly in agencies. And there's leadership that allows for an organization to continue on its plan, and then there's leadership that looks at things and disrupts them and tries to change them and tries to make them better and tries to mold them into what should be in the future. And I've always been very impressed with Jan's ability to do that, and do that with humor, and do that with grace, to do that with interest. And we started a while ago now with a relationship while he was the chairman of the DLR, and that was one of the very first relationships, public-private partnerships, between an American industrial company and the European Space Agency. And that has now carried through his role as the Director General for ESA. And while I admire all the leadership, I also admire the fact that you have to take 22 countries and also point them in the right direction. And we have challenges with that in our country, trying to get 50% going in the right direction, let alone 22 and this 100%. So, Jan, if you could, maybe a few words.
Thank you very much, Mark. You see, I have here a picture which is very simple. And of course, I could talk about global challenges like climate change, limited resources, energy, man-made and natural disasters, and also curiosity. And all of these global challenges need global partnership. This is a very simple message each and everyone would sign immediately. But instead of doing so, I would like to give you a small story. There were two friends, they were not friends at the beginning, there were two people. Let's call them poor and rich. The one is a little bit richer and the other one a little bit poorer. It doesn't mean that rich is really rich and poor is not really poor, but both have limited resources. The one has a little bit more, the other one a little bit less. And they met and they exchanged dreams and so on, and they found out, together we can do better. So for instance, buying a nice car. So poor was not, he had not enough money to buy a car, which even did not want to spend all his money for the car. So they just merged the money and they bought a nice car. Also a house, so again, the same situation. They bought together a house, which they could afford together, but not individually. Now, just to have to make an analogy, as I always like analogies, that these two people, poor and rich, can be also institutions, can be even countries or states. So if you take this into mind when I'm going on with the story, please always think about that these are not just only two persons. It could be Mark and myself, he would be the rich one. But anyhow, so far they really experienced a lot of things and they were unified and they thought, we can promise we will stay together, remain united forever because we are so close friends and it makes sense to share our interests, to share also our investments. But then they made a walk through a forest and there was a small river and they had to cross this one, and of course as they were working together it was very simple for them to build a small bridge and everything was fine. They went further into this forest and suddenly a large bear approached them. So this was a dangerous situation. A large bear came up and poor, he knew how to climb. So he immediately climbed up a tree and was secured. Unfortunately, Rich did not know to do that, and at that moment Poor was already up the tree, so did not explain him how to do it. So the bear came closer and Rich was thinking, okay, shit situation, huh? What to do? And the only idea he had at that moment, and it was a smart idea, he lay down on the ground, breathless, pretending to be a dead man. And as you all know, bears don't touch dead bodies. So the bear came closer, smelt his ears, and then said, okay, the bear moved away, and so both survived. Poor had observed what happened on the ground. So he came down and said, "What was that? What happened? What happened?" And Rich said, "Yes, it was very interesting. The bear spoke to me and advised me not to believe a false friend." So what I would like to say with that, true partnership is not only to do nice things together when it's easy, but especially when there are problems, to stand together in difficult situations. And this is my message. Partnership is fine, but partnership for me becomes real partnership when it is also remaining in difficult situations. And we all know that difficult situations may come also in business.
Thank you, Jan. Very good. And, no, I'm fine, thanks. Last, I'd like to introduce Jorge, who is representing the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. And as some of you have known and was mentioned here at the panel, that Sierra Nevada has a very unique relationship with the United Nations. A few years ago, we had a thought, and the thought was, what could we do to bring space to the world, and bring space to the world in ways that it had not been done before? And the idea that we came up with was turning our Dream Chaser into an active laboratory which could fly independent of the space station and fly independent of any particular destination in orbit to do significant research. And the idea was, within this laboratory, we could have approximately 20 to 30 experimental stations. And what if we decided to take those experimental stations and offer them up to countries who have never been to space? And part of that motivation was to say how we felt, how I felt, when we first got into the space business. And there's so many smart people around the world, there's so many young people around the world who deserve to have that opportunity to feel what it's like to put something in space. And an idea is a good idea, but it doesn't go anywhere unless it gets a committed group behind it. And we brought this idea to the United Nations and to Simonetta, who leads up UNESCO. And we shared that idea with the hope that maybe someday, over quite a long period of time, we might be able to work together and create an opportunity for what might be the first United Nations space mission using Dream Chaser. Well, that idea took place, and through a lot of hard work by the staff at the United Nations, turned into a relationship within a 12-month period of time, which for the United Nations is quite remarkable. And yesterday we were very proud to announce the next phase in that program, which was to call for science. And we are now actively out looking for the countries and for those young people and for those experiments from around the world that could fly with us in our mission in the early 20s. And that was released through a press release and also on the UN website. And I'd like Jorge to talk a little bit about his view on partnerships, but I will say, Jan, the one thing that is perhaps more difficult than what you do is to get 84 countries to all agree unanimously. And having sat through a UN mission and understanding what that was like, I have to say I'm glad I'm on this side of the fence. But it is a remarkable process to see that all decisions are done unanimously within this group. And when that is, while it's hard to get there, it does provide strength in the decision. That decision then becomes the decision of everyone going forward. So, Jorge, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Mark, for inviting us. I have chosen this image that you are seeing up there. I'm going to go back a little bit. On September 2015, countries adopted a UN resolution that was containing 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals are there to change the world. There are 17, and they are part of an agenda that is called Transform the World until 2030. The image that is chosen is one of the goals, is the goal number 17, which is Partnership for the Goals. And actually, as Mark was pointing out, we have announced a couple of days ago a partnership with Sierra Nevada on orbital space mission that is going to be a mission fully devoted to the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a clear example of a partnership. The call for interest is up in our website, and please have a look. It's a very simple call for interest. And we are trying to see how people is interested. It's open to institutions, it's open to universities. So please have a look. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals are a key, and they have key elements that allows us to understand what is going to happen in the coming years in terms of partnerships. On one hand, there is sustainability. Space has to become more and more sustainable. We have to continue benefiting from space, and the next generation have to continue benefiting from space. And for that, it has to be sustainable. United Nations, the Office for Outer Space Affairs, is supporting member states in developing the long-term sustainability guidelines, because we want to continue enjoying the benefits that space is bringing to Earth. And we see that more and more happening also in the development of new vehicles. We see the Dream Chaser is a reusable vehicle, but we are also seeing with Ariane 5 that is incorporating in the design phase life cycle assessment. So sustainability is going to be key. Ariane 6, I missed it up. Ariane 6 is incorporating the life cycle assessment. So sustainability is key in the whole process. Also, partnership. It's very important. Sustainable Development Goal number 17 is showing that, it's demonstrating that we have to work all together, and space has been the place for collaboration and partnership traditionally. We have seen in the beginning of the space age that it was driven by technology, that it was a technological race. Now today we are seeing more and more services-oriented approach and looking for partnerships. Actually, United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, the mission that it has is to promote international cooperation on the peaceful uses for outer space. And we are firm believers in that cooperation, international cooperation, is the way to go in space. This partnership that we are having with Sierra Nevada, it's a good opportunity for developed countries, but also for developing countries that will have the opportunity to fly the payloads in microgravity. So these are the two key elements that I think they are very important for the next years to come, for the next 10 years. Sustainability has to be there, it has to be in the picture, it cannot be forgotten. And partnership, we have to find ways to work together. As Jan was mentioning before, there are easy times where it's very easy to partner, but there are also difficult times, and it's in those times where true partnerships really shine. Thank you very much.
What I'd like to do now is perhaps ask one question to each of you and see if we have any time to bring in questions from the audience. Robert, when you spoke, one of the, I think the interesting things I know that you've gone through is that to make fundamental change in an agency like NASA, one can say things, and then one can do things, and then one has to change the culture underneath that. And certainly over the last number of years, as NASA has gone into the public-private partnerships, and my company and others have been connected, there's been, I think, a lot of success, multiple vehicles moving. But explain a little bit of how the culture changes underneath, because that really ultimately is what has to happen to make this successful.
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. I think what we've seen is that we struggled at first with the model and the insight and oversight and how we would track how folks are doing. But over time, what I've seen is the teams have melded together. And I use it, one of my favorite examples that I've used in the past was the first time that Dragon approached the space station. There's all sorts of rules you can just imagine, right? We call it the pizza box, the area, all the rules around the space station, got to follow them. And what was interesting was, and this is when I kind of knew it was a tipping point for me in terms of our teams. What was interesting was SpaceX was ready to abort. Things weren't going exactly as they thought. They're sitting there working with Mission Control in Houston, and the NASA mission controllers go, hang on, we can figure this out. And we ended up birthing that day. And it was the case where nobody cared about the badge, nobody cared about what company you were, it was getting the mission done. And to me, that was a big turning point for us. So I think as new practices have come into play, and you've seen this with your folks, new practices are brought to the table, two things occur. It challenges my understanding of my own requirements to make sure I can articulate them in a way that the new folks can say, okay, yeah, we understand that. it also challenges my ability to maybe accept a different practice and learn. And so I've watched as, obviously we probably started like 2 bookends, and they're coming closer. As the new entrants learn more about how we do business and why we do it, sometimes there's some scar tissue there that we want them to take advantage of, but also they challenge us to do things differently as well. And I think that's the cultural change. But at the end of the day, the cultural change comes because we get the mission done. And we get the mission done in a different way, but the mission got done. And so I think that's been the piece of it.
Yeah. And NASA has been at the forefront of this. And what you've learned, do you see it? Is this something that can be exported to other agencies, or is this unique to the culture of NASA? What's your view on that?
Yeah, we've had plenty of discussions with our European friends, all our international partners have talked about this, and the concept of commercial space is often a different, it's hard for us to articulate, and it's really based on the way our economy in the US works and the way we do things. But we're starting to see little victories there as well. I know Jan has been dealing with this from an ESA standpoint. What we're really finding is a lot of the new entrants from a lot of the new countries that are coming in and creating a space agency, they're actually more slanted toward helping their industry than creating a space agency, if that makes sense. So there's different models, and I think it can work in many different ways. I don't think we should lock ourselves into this is the only way to do it. I think there's several models that will allow us to do it. And again, as long as you got that rallying cry of a mission that we want to go do, a lot of the other stuff falls away.
That's very good. Yeah, and you've seen this now from across the ocean and watched it, and personally with working with our organization. I know when we first talked, we talked about the fact that a private company now owns the spaceship or owns the asset or owns the intellectual property. That was a very unique concept as I went around Europe talking to people. What's your perspective looking from the outside on what you've seen? How do you think it might get better, and what are the challenges to getting this to work within a European context?
To be very blunt, and this is time to be blunt, I'm jealous about the development in the US. I would never say that in public, but here I can say it in small. I'm jealous because of the investors you have, the way that you can work with them. I'm jealous. So the only solution we have is we have to find a European way forward. So we are observing, of course, what is happening in the US. We cannot copy it, and it would, if we would copy it, it would be a bad copy, and this is not something you should do. So we are trying to develop our own way. There are some problems, but concerning public-private partnership, we have a different approach. But it's working. It started in telecommunication, where we, from ESA, only pay money for a telecommunication project if the thing we are going to do is really new, just another development for another platform or so. It must be really a breakthrough, and then we pay up to maximum 50% of the project. Maximum 50%, usually 30%. And industry pays the other part, sharing of risk, sharing of investment. And by the way, ESA does not try to own the intellectual property rights. In general terms, this is different to, for instance, the German Aerospace Center where I was before. So ESA does not try to keep intellectual property rights. We always try that this is directly with industry. So this is also maybe a different approach, which is sometimes where we get some criticism. So the politicians are asking, how many intellectual property, how many patents do you have? And then I have to say, this is not our goal. So that's strange. So we started with telecommunication. I'm here under the supervision of my Inspector General. I have to be careful, Tony is here. Then we started now also Earth observation, where we also have a special program with public-private partnership, and also in the launcher sector. In the launcher sector, the approach in the US, again, we discussed it in Europe. I said, why should we not say for institutional launches, we guarantee a price, and then industry can do additional launches for lower prices, selling them wherever in the world. But the member states clearly said, no, we don't support that. It must be one price for a launcher wherever it is sold. This is a disadvantage, first of all, but we found this in the development, again, through a public-private partnership, that industry is participating with big money also for the development. Then we have a situation which might be different to the US. So you are with NASA, you are the main player overall in the US. I mean, for the civil space activities, you are the main player for all. With our 22 member states, we have inside ESA also member states like France, Italy, Germany, United Kingdom, which have their own national space activities. And also it is in our convention written that it should be finally be included in ESA program. Of course, they don't like this sentence of our convention, which is a law. So therefore, it is the other way around, that some of the member states are saying, okay, we are using ESA only if we cannot do it on a national base. This is, of course, very difficult for us also in partnership thing. But if you allow me, I would also mention a point of cultural change. So we are trying inside ESA in the executive body really to have a cultural change also with the coherence, similar by the way, also what you are doing. You have the science and the exploration team, you are getting them closer and closer. We have the same. When I started to become an ESA Director General, we had 10 directors for different areas, different subjects in ESA. And the member states asked me, okay, what is your vision? And I said, okay, I want to have maximum 5 directors, because that makes it more coherent. One for all the applications, one for science and exploration, one for the launchers, one for the internal management, financial and human resource, and one for the procurement with industry, 5. And the member states immediately said, no, we need 10 directors. The reason is they want to be represented by directors. And they sent me home and said, come back with a better idea. And I came back and said, okay, I have 3 directors only. They were not happy about that. So this is something which is cultural change, which is necessary, but now we have 10 directors, but I grouped them in 5 areas, so again, some similarity to NASA. Science and exploration is one area, all applications, 3 directorates are one area, and so on. But another change, and also a question of partnership is, and there partnership is a difficult word. You see, differently to NASA, the Director General of ESA does not have to go to the Congress or the Senate or the President. I have to go to all 22 member states to get something approved. And when I proposed a new way for new discoveries, breakthrough investigations, they asked for a 5-year plan. And you cannot do a 5-year plan for breakthrough technologies. You have to be agile and flexible. And this is really a big task right now for me, and this is, by the way, one of the reasons one of my closest co-workers is not here in Adelaide, because she has to convince in meetings in Paris and in Amsterdam, close to Amsterdam, our member states, that this is the right solution. So, change of culture as a basis for partnership, internally and externally, this is really a big challenge. It sounds simple, but I think Robert and we know exactly what it means. You cannot just say, do it, that will not work. You have to change the culture with arguments and also by being a role model for that.
Sure. All right.
Just have something really quick that I should have said that Jan reminded me of, and I think I'll use Dream Chaser as the perfect example. There's also public work that gets done that gets transferred out and people take advantage of. If you had to start from scratch with Dream Chaser versus the HL20 work that NASA had done for years, you'd be, and I mentioned—
It wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, and I mentioned,
at that time.
and I mentioned the parachute test. I mentioned all of, so the public side does build kind of a foundation that people all can build off of. So we got to make sure we remember that foundation is there, and that's what makes a public-private partnership different, or important. The other thing I was going to just add for these guys real quick that Jan said is not one size fits all. I think he said it really well. If you just try to copy what we're doing, it won't work depending on what your space agency in your country wants to do with their industrial base. I think you learn different ways to do it, but it can be done.
Yeah, you make a great point, Rob, because oftentimes we look at what we do, what we are doing going forward. In our case, we would not have been where we are if we did not have the opportunity to license out 14 years ago the HL20 data, because at that time with 20 people in our company, it was not going to be possible. But it was possible to license it, and it was facilitated by NASA, and it's now become, I think, one of the largest technology transfers. And we talk about the future, but sometimes we don't celebrate the fact that that was an amazing feat by a lot of great NASA people that has now had the chance to live another day and move forward. Eric, I'd like to turn to you, and I obviously know something about your organization, but the two things I'd like you to talk about is, one, I think is here over and over, the commercial space, define what that is, because so many people misdefine it in my word, my understanding, and I spend a lot of time trying to do that, and I think the audience would like to hear your take on it. And then secondly, I think there's this misnomer that it's a monolithic organization where everybody is the same. And it truly isn't. And there are companies that are out in operation, there are companies who are prototyping, there are companies who are starting up, there are support companies. Maybe you could take a moment, so you have your own internal challenges, as the agencies do, to manage all these different types of companies who now all want to talk in a collective voice. So define what you think commercial space is, and then talk a little bit about your challenge to talk about how do you deal with all these different types. In effect, your 22 agencies or 22 different kinds of companies that you have to get pointing in the same direction.
When people ask how to define, commercial, there's a famous Supreme Court case of defining what pornography was. I don't know what it is, but I know it when I see it. And I think a lot of times we see it very differently on how commercial is truly defined. In fact, the U.S. has started up the National Space Council, and one of the first things that the executive director, the executive secretary, Scott Pace, has looked to do is to say, all right, we need a clear definition of what commercial is. Now, there's a definition in the National Space Policy. I think, and that's what the government goes on, and a lot of people don't really feel that's truly what commercial is. It's a way of doing business. It's cost plus versus fixed price versus cost plus contracts. A lot of times when you look at that, if you say to your customer, if NASA says we need this product, and the commercial partner says, okay, we will do it for this price, and you have to hold your feet to the fire. I think we're seeing that working well with the commercial cargo program, with the commercial crew program, but it's hard because a lot of people feel some companies, more the legacy companies, feel that they aren't part of the commercial marketplace. Well, in a lot of ways they do. How do you tell a company like Boeing they're not a commercial company? They're probably one of the biggest commercial companies. So we try not to draw those barriers and put people in a box on what commercial is. It's just the way you do business, a lot of ways. And then the second question on managing many different areas. I always, when I explain what CSF does, I start from the ground up. We have about 10 different spaceports in the U.S. and 4 different spaceports, and we have launch providers, but we also have the infrastructure that are building these launch services companies. We have the satellites folks, the operators. You have the people that are doing stuff on the International Space Station. People want to do things beyond the International Space Station, mining and whatnot. And the success that we are having, it's twofold. It's one, I think, the relationship that we have with our government agency partners, certainly with NASA, that Robert has an open door for any concerns we have. With our regulatory partner, the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, every country in the world should be jealous of the work that the FAA is doing with the Office of Commercial Space Transportation. They listen to their customers. They want to adjust to what the customers need. How can we make this more efficient? And so if there's regulatory reforms needed, they want to work with us on that. And where does that kind of boost the commercial aspect? The investors. It's the investors that are coming to these commercial companies and say, I want a part of this. Hey, what's a new company? I say, hey, there's a company out there that are going to do additive manufacturing and of space launch vehicles. How do I get involved with that? The Space Angels Network that is putting millions of dollars, to $3 billion that was invested from the private sector. They're investing because they see the security and the relative, calmness of our marketplace. So.
Very good. Ori, I know that you represent the scientific side of the United Nations, and we talked a little bit about the potential, the mission that we're doing and the science that's going on board. In your mind, in terms of the types of partnerships from these countries and the types of science you'd like perhaps to see, what do you think we can do? What would be something that would be important to you and to the United Nations and to the world? Have you given any thought to that?
Yeah, it's working. Actually, what I would like to see most there is not necessarily the scientific part of it, which is very interesting, like to have experiments that are supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. But I would like to see the collaboration part, because in the CFI, in the Call for Interest, we are not establishing any organization that they have to run. They can be partnering with different universities from all across the world, developing and developed countries. And that's something that I'm very, very much interested in seeing, this collaboration.
So that partnership, in effect, is a defined partnership, which is a little different than some other partnerships. What I think we're saying, and you're saying, is let the people who are doing this create the types of partnerships that they would like to do within their experiment. Is that?
Yeah, exactly.
That's pretty interesting. What do you think is going to happen with that?
Well, we have seen it already we have a program that is called KiboCube, which is run with the Japanese Aerospace Agency, JAXA. And we have seen partnership already happening in that program between Italy and Kenya, for instance, and where a developed country is helping a developing country. And that has been very interesting. It's creating role models in the country, like Kenya, and people get attracted to it. And you see new generations inspired and are working together. So I want to see that at a global scale. And that's what this mission has the potential to bring, this partnership at the global scale.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting, because this is almost, not only are you doing the science, but you're also defining the partnership that you want to go do that science. And that aspect, I think, is never really quite been done like this before. Manu, I've saved you for last for a reason, and that is because you're going to have the most interesting thing to say of this group. But tell us, how many countries are involved with your organization right now? How many?
So 110 countries.
110 countries. And you think you have difficulties, huh? How many people are there in the organization across these 110 countries?
So we have 10,000 members and alumni over every single time zone you can possibly imagine.
So it's an easy job to do then, right?
It's just, just an everyday 9 to 5, yeah.
So you're representing these 10,000 members today in front of this group of people, and you're representing, in effect, our future. We're doing this, but space is multi-generational, and whatever we do, you're going to make it better, and you're going to take it, and you and your 10,000 members are going to take it to the next level. What advice would you give us now? What do you think we should be doing to make your future better right now? And how could we, because what we do right now creates the foundation, strong or weak, for what you then have to pick up. So how do we not make such a mess for you later?
Oh, I don't think you've made a mess, no. So if you look at the experience and the career profiles of these fine gentlemen on stage, you'll see that it is very, very extensive. And so we as the young professionals, we as the next generations, want you to take us on that journey with you. And I mentioned that when I was giving my presentation, that we don't want to be just spectators in this. Really get us involved from the very get-go. And we talk about global partnerships, and I know that there are, big partnerships that have a lot of money involved and a lot of prestige, and that's completely fine. But there's also smaller global partnerships. So, it might just be investing in a university that sends students to international conferences such as this. It might be putting together a scholarship. I know NASA does a scholarship with SJC, so does USA, ESA. So it's really taking those small steps. And as Eric was saying, those small steps mean a lot for people who might not have traveled outside of Kenya before, but who have always wanted to go to space. So if we think about the future of the industry, so the different market trends, the fact that emerging in 10 years' time, I think the word emerging or non-spacefaring country is going to be eradicated. Every country is going to have space capabilities. So take us along that journey so that we can have input, valuable input now and for the future.
And I know that you spend a lot of time with your members. What would be the 2 or 3 areas that most excite them right now in terms of the future? We speak of many things over the 5 days of this conference, and we speak as if we know what we want to do, but very often, as we all know, these ideas are in conflict, and we're not getting to do them all. What would you say, and I know I'm asking you to speak for 10,000 people, but what's your view as the leader of this organization that of the 2 or 3 things you think would be most interesting in this partnership concept and for the future?
So I would say, and I'm going to talk very generally here because it is a very broad question. So I would say space exploration is one of the key topics. So, you know, if you look at people under the age of 35 and you ask them, why did you get into the space industry? About 90% of them will say that I wanted to be an astronaut. So the idea of exploration, whether it's robotic or human or whatever the case is, the idea of going out and searching and finding new things is so compelling for my generation. So exploration, however you want to define it, is that. I also think that this, you know, I don't want to say battle, but the challenges between the government, the commercial space industry is really exciting as well. And I feel that those debates are really pushing the industry. They're pushing the technological capabilities that we want to see that are going to get us to Moon, to the Mars. So I think, again, a very broad answer, but I would say those 2 are very important to us.
And which one is not? What areas do you think, where we might think this is really very exciting and we want to do this, doesn't seem to get the enthusiasm of your members?
I would like to ask this question to everybody else on the panel, actually, before I give my answer. Eric?
I think some of the global barriers that are put forth through export control licensing and ITAR, I think that people would like to see those eased and eventually go away. I mean, there's certainly a need at some levels, but not quite to the extent, and I think that shuts down global cooperation in a lot of ways.
Don, what do you think we should get rid of?
For us it's easy. In our convention it says peaceful purpose only. So you know what we don't like to do.
All right.
Yeah, we are talking also in the United Nations about the peaceful uses, and we know that space is a dual-use technology, but still fostering the peaceful uses of the space is something that has to be there.
Just to make it not a misunderstanding, for me, security is peaceful purpose. Okay? Just to make a difference, because sometimes people are thinking that this is security is not peaceful; it's something different. Just to make it clear.
Robert, do you have anything?
Yeah, I say it all the time, and people are probably tired of hearing it, but I call it the tyranny of or. We don't talk about the word partnerships. We use partnerships. Partnerships is an and. You know, it's public, it's private, and international. It's not, so anytime I tell my team, anytime you throw an or at me, I'm going to change it to and it changes the dynamic of the discussion completely. And I always use the example, milk or cookies, or milk and cookies, much better.
So Manu, you brought them back on stage, so to answer, you have to answer yourself, but I'd like you to also end this session on a positive note, on a thought that this group might ponder as we're leaving. I don't want to end it on a negative note, but please, what would be your answer to that question?
So let me first address the first question. I think I would agree with all the gentlemen on the stage, and on behalf of the next generation, I would say that it's very well and good to have these discussions, but what we want to see is actionable steps to make sure that we are, we're addressing the challenges of the industry now, but what steps are we taking to get to this end point, and how do we measure success when we get there? So, and I hope that answered your question, but on a positive note, I would say that, and I reiterate this over and over again, for the Space Generation Advisory Council, that is a volunteer network of students and young professionals. The fact that they fly to Australia, that they want to be part of these discussions, that they, give up their time after school, after work, on weekends, outside of their families, to contribute to the space industry is evidence of their enthusiasm and engagement. So really, I say this all the time, but bring us along for the ride.
Well, I could do nothing to add to that, so I want to end the panel and thank you all very much for stimulating discussion, and thank you all for listening.